Well, good morning, dear students. And a lovely morning it is here too after the storms we had in the last couple of days. I dare say that those of you who are in Brooklyn had something of the same. Of course, I don't know that you are in Brooklyn, and the beauty of my asynchronous teaching is that you could be anywhere. Of course, that's not true if you're having to do other classes. Mind you, Zoom, you could Zoom from Timbuktu. How would anyone know where you were? Problem would be to get to Timbuktu at this moment where it would be too expensive and too dangerous. Trains and planes and dangerous automobiles. So probably none of you are in Timbuktu, but I might be. However, outside my window in Timbuktu, or actually in the wild forest of Mount Overlook, where I live, you can see greenery. I hope you can see greenery. It's so beautiful, rain-washed and glistening and happy. So I come to you this morning for a kind of a Sunday morning sermon of the sort that Pastor Stern used to give, although he didn't actually give sermons like this at all, but he gave sermons. And then he went home and wrote his weirdly witty and anarchic masterwork, which you may or may not have begun. And if you haven't begun, there's plenty of time. But if you have, you may be pining for a few helpful thoughts, which I may or may not be able to supply. So it's a work that, for someone of my generation, is put in context by the immediately preceding, today, not preceding the 1740s, the immediately preceding examples of English anarchic wit, which seem to people of my generation, people who've been around in the last 70 years or so, to be very British. In fact, when you go back far enough, you'll find the anarchic wit of Aristophanes and the anarchic wit of Monsieur Rabelais, and it doesn't really become particularly British until Pastor Stern. And then we have, in recent times, as I say, we have, in the immediately post-Second World War era, a group of people organized by one of the funniest men who ever lived, an Irishman called Spike Milligan, the Irish at the forefront of every literary enterprise involving the British or the Irish, the English language. Spike brought together a group of three people, actually. Peter Sellers, his fellow comedian, in this enterprise called The Goons. Peter Sellers, who went on to be a huge, world-famous movie star, and a Welsh tenor called Harry Seacombe, also a very funny man. And the three of them went on to perform Spike's unbelievably funny scripts, which can be bought, can be acquired. The Goons are among the most brilliant performers in our history, in the history of our language, and they were followed by another troupe called Monty Python and his Flying Circus. And they were a group formed from Oxford and Cambridge. In my generation, I knew them all very well, and I'm still very close to one of the most successful survivors of that gang, a comedian who rejoices in the wonderful name of Eric Idle. Eric wanted me once to write him a pantomime in which he would play the character of Idle Eric. Idle Eric, played by Eric Idle. It never happened, but it's a nice thought. Anyway, these people, this group, who went on to include as their illustrator a wonderful illustrator who became a distinguished, one of the great Hollywood filmmakers, who made Brazil and 12 Monkeys and a number of other marvelous films. And they made series after series of highly anarchic and disorganized TV sketches, which I was constantly trying to persuade them, fool that I was, to make into a more organized and less chaotic, a more disciplined kind of humour. What kind of a numbskull was I? Well, that kind of numbskull. And happily, they ignored me and went on to make enormous amounts of money and huge worldwide success, particularly in America, where it may well be that their fame has passed so far into the remote past that you wouldn't have heard of Monty Python, and it would mean nothing to you. But if you mentioned it to your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, you'd definitely get a response. So this tradition, which perhaps goes back, the more recent one, to Sterne, was one that he was able to cull from the classics and use Cervantes and the many humorous and alienation effects in Don Quixote and in Rabelais, and to develop them into hitherto previously unimagined complexity. So if you have started, you will be baffled, amused, I do hope, amused, but if not, you have my total sympathy. Nobody should have to be amused. I can't force amusement on anybody. So you will have my unflinching support. And even if amused, you will be wondering, what on earth is this for? What is the point? Yes, it's entertaining. Yes, it's amusing. But why? So what? Well, it's an unanswerable question where humor is concerned. The larger question is, why is this ancient professor forcing on us something for which there is no better excuse than laughter? Mind you, that's a pretty good excuse. And aside from the underlying premise of all anarchic wit, which is that the universe is not to be seriously explained, but if explained at all, then unseriously, which is a profound belief that many people hold. And the other, perhaps, purpose of the book that we might find in it is to better understand the function of the genre, the novel. What is it? What does it do best? And Parson Sterne tells us that what it does best is digress and forget where it's going, and then come back, or maybe not. You will have noticed that you appear to be reading a book that is about to tell you, through the voice of the storyteller, how he himself was born. But you don't get to it. In fact, it's hundreds of pages before you get to it. So many things seem to crop up, to be needing to be told, before you get to that wonderful, agonizing moment where he becomes the person he is, who will eventually be the storyteller, the narrator of this entire enormous book. So along the way, you meet many other people whom you will spend time with. You haven't really met Uncle Toby yet, and you've not spent enough time with Walter, Tristram's father, yet, or even with Tristram himself, that magical and yet infuriating and bewildering human being. You will meet, if you haven't started yet, Pastor Yorick, a cleric of the author's stamp, not necessarily similar to the author, but another pastor, who no sooner appears than he dies. And his name, borrowed from Shakespeare, where one of the most memorable lines apparently ever uttered by a stage character is uttered by Hamlet when he says, "Alas, poor Yorick." And he's in the graveyard, which he has passed on the way back from England to get to Elsinore in Denmark, little knowing that he's about to bump into the funeral of his beloved Ophelia. But the gravedigger throws up a skull, and Hamlet says, "Well, whose was it?" "Oh, a whoreson rogue it was," says the gravedigger, knows exactly whose it was. It was the king's jester, Yorick, who many a time had carried the young Prince Hamlet on his back, and other stories that Hamlet tells, but not before exclaiming, "Alas, poor Yorick," a completely meaningless utterance, which is the more remarkable for having caused 400 years of people to repeat it, even though none of us know anybody called Yorick. But we say, "Alas, poor Yorick," for no good reason. This is how memes are made. And Yorick is the name that Lawrence Sterne gave to his pastor. And with his passing, his death, which arrives almost as soon as he's introduced, Sterne makes one of the most famous gestures in the history of the novel, which is that what follows is a black page, completely black, and you turn the page and the other side is completely black too, to celebrate the death of poor Yorick, who has, in fact, "Alas, poor Yorick" written on his gravestone, on his imaginary gravestone, as well he might. Now, I'm sorry to say that you'll see this double-sided black page as long as you didn't get the inexpensive, which, I mean, I'm all for your getting the inexpensive, what's it called, the Wordsworth Classics edition, which produces not at all what was intended by Lawrence Sterne, who's extremely careful about his graphic devices, including the length of his dashes, his M, double M, triple M, quadruple M dashes, wonderful things, which I'm sorry you won't get to see if you're reading the Penguin version either. You will only get to see the full decorative force and the immense care taken by Sterne over the pictorial aspects of his punctuation. You'll only get to see that if you splash out $21 and get the Norton edition. And then you'll see all sorts of wondrous things. They are rather wonderful, and if you're, if not a connoisseur, a lover of punctuation, as I am, you won't want to miss out, because Sterne was one of the great punctuators of all time, and he tries, perhaps harder than any other writer before or since, to convey the interruptions, the abruptions, the breakings off, the resumptions, the hesitations of real speech, and to convey that in punctuation. It's really a joy to see. Certainly for a practitioner, if you dare take on board the double, treble, quadruple, quintuple M-dash, a marvelous device. I've dared go as far as the triple M-dash in my own books, and I haven't dared go any further. Oh, maybe I've got a quadruple M-dash somewhere. It might inspire you. So, as I was saying, one of the things that the possible meanings that we could attribute to our reading of this book is to understand what the novel is and what it invites us in. What is the feast laid out for us by the novel? Is it a realistic story of the kind that people have always told and will always tell, and will be called a novel if it's long enough and unless it's in verse? He invites in, of course, all kinds of successors, including William Faulkner in As I Lay Dying, who pops a little image of a coffin, a little sort of drawing representation of a coffin, tiny on one page, as the poor man who is dying, hears the rasp of the carpenter's saw as the carpenter outside his very window is making his coffin. And the coffin then promptly appears in the text. So it's freed many people up to do extraordinary things like that. And we'll discuss perhaps at greater length the very function of humour in culture, and that the importance of this book to so many people over the centuries now goes beyond an easy laugh, and addresses the whole matter of high seriousness and how we should approach it, and what function amusement has, a profound one, I think, in a healthy culture, something that perhaps we should be thinking about as we approach voting, and, oh, please vote, in a few short months, and bring to bear our sense of humour, our capacity to tolerate terror, and whatever the future might bring, of which more soon. Have a wonderful week. Bye.